I might have bragged to some of you about this before, but I worked on Call of Duty. And for those of you who are completely fucking clueless, Call of Duty is the top-selling video game of all time. Now, when I was working... Fuck those guys. When I was working on this game, it was a summer internship that I was doing in Portland, Maine. And near the end of the summer, my boss told me that because the feature I was working on wasn't finished, they weren't going to be able to put it in the game. But if I took a semester off and finished it myself, not only would they put the feature in the game, I would get a fat bonus check. Now, I know just as well as all the other guys in the room, when you put an enormous check in your bank account, you start producing some sort of pheromone that makes hot chicks want to bone you. People know that well here. But I was still a little hesitant to commit, because I've been on something that seems a little bit like an educational ladder since before I can remember. I think it started when I went to a fancy private kindergarten that I got into off my ability to add dice together. Each year throughout middle school and high school, I moved one rung up on the ladder, one rung closer to college. And each year in college, I moved one rung up, one rung closer to, real life. And if I took this semester off, it would be the first September where I didn't take that next step up on the ladder and get closer to, starting my actual life. And I was really excited to start living. So, the weekend where I was mulling this decision over happened to also be the weekend of Smash Dock. And Smash Dock is this enormous party that happens a couple hours north of Portland in the woods that my roommates were always going to. And I was nervous about this party, which might seem strange because I'm uncommonly handsome and funny and, the sort of guy who does pretty well at parties. But not so well at these rural parties. When the conversation turns to cow maintenance and the menu at Dairy Queen and crossbows, I sort of run out of things to say. So I was comforted by the fact that my friend Eric was driving up there with me, because I'd gotten pretty close to this guy Eric over the summer. We were really similar in a lot of ways. I sort of thought of him as the guy in Maine who was most similar to me. He didn't have a gun, which narrowed out half of those lunatics. But he also studied computer science in college, so we had that in common. But he had dropped out because he was bored of waiting for real life, He just wanted to get started. So he got a job with his dad's roofing company and just started doing the things he loved, which were snorting Adderall and having sex. And he did quite a lot of both of those things. He seemed to have had sex with every woman in Portland. I remember just a story of his prowess. There were these two twins that were both beautiful, and he wanted to sleep with both of them, obviously. And he had slept with one of them, and he was at a party talking to the other one, or at least he thought it was the other one, and then it came out that it was the one he had already had sex with. And it's hard to explain to women why that's an enviable situation, but it's obviously totally badass, ignoring all the hurt feelings involved. So we got to the party, and because I was a little nervous, I was sort of sticking close to Eric, and I remember there was this massive bonfire in the center of everything. It was just the biggest bonfire I'd ever seen. And I cracked a joke. I was like, "Oh, you should totally try and jump over that fire, dude." Which was a joke because, the fire was so big, you would totally burn to death. It was really a funny joke, but thanks anyway. It comes into it later. So I settled in, got myself a beer and a burger, and I was talking to some guy about his crossbow, probably, or his cow, or the menu at Dairy Queen. And I see this streak out of the corner of my eye, and it's Eric, and he's sprinting directly at the fire. And I guess he, took me up on my dare. And he jumps from the edge of the fire, and he's doing this airwalk thing. Everything seems to go in slow motion. And we all realize that the arc of his jump is going to land him in the fire. He's not going to make it. But he thinks quickly and puts his foot down on one of the less burned logs and sort of helps himself over to the other side of the fire. And everybody starts clapping and cheering, and I run around the other side to go congratulate him. But he picked the angle of his jump badly because he had jumped so that he landed in the pile of all the wood that was yet to be burned, and he had just totally wiped out. He was rolling around on the ground being like, "Oh, dude, I think I broke my collarbone. Oh, my collarbone. I broke my collarbone." I was like, "What, you want me to drive you to the hospital?" I should have added that last noise because he didn't pick up on the sarcasm. I think you should, dude. Which was totally lame because I had to do it at that point. There was no backing out. So we got in the car and started driving, and it was a bitch to get out of the forest. We had deep in the forest, and when we finally did, you know, it's like what they call like not forest in Maine, which is a lot like forest. We like went in a gas station, and the directions the guy gave me were go down to the end of everything and turn left. Like, I think Maine is already beyond the end of everything. So I'm sitting in the waiting room. I tried a lot of jokes there, and they all failed, but I'm sitting in the waiting room watching a fishing show. And I'm feeling really lonely, but I had this like weird euphoria because I'm so far from everything that made me comfortable before that summer. But I know I can stay. You know, I'm in control of my life. I can just stay there and live for 3 months in Maine. And I start thinking about Eric and the way he just dropped out and took control of his life. And he was having a great time, you know. And I realized the ladder was just like in my head, you know. It's just like something I thought up. I'm just like a person living my life. And that's the climax of the story. But it could have ended with that epiphany. But then Eric walks out back into the waiting room. And he's like, "Oh man, I was right. Like my collarbone's broken." And I'm like, "Oh, that's too bad. Like, what are they gonna like wrap you in plaster?" And he's like, "Oh no, I've broken it before. Like they just give you painkillers." I'm like, "Oh, you know what a great painkiller is? Alcohol. Why didn't you just get more fucked up at that party? Because now you made me drag my ass to this stupid fucking hospital." He's like, "Oh yeah, I guess I could have." And I'm like, "Oh, well now it's 3 a.m. and I don't know how to get back to that fucking party, so I'm gonna have to drive 2 hours south to Portland, Maine. And guess who's gonna drive? Me, because you broke your fucking collarbone and can't drive." Yeah, dick. I drank a cup of coffee and got in the car. And when that motherfucker tried to go to sleep in the passenger seat, I put all the windows down and turned the music to the max. And I was acting angry, but I was having the time of my life.